Everybody. Please can I welcome everyone to this meeting of Cabinet on Tuesday the 15th of November from the Walton Suite in the Winchester Guildhall. The time is 9:30 a.m. My name is Councillor Martin Todd, Chairperson of the Cabinet and Leader of the Council. This meeting is audio recorded, live streamed and will be available on the Council's YouTube channel. Subtitles are available and advice on how to turn this on is set out on our website. If you are joining us online, please turn your camera and microphone off until your item. Can everyone please ensure mobile phones are on silent or switched off? Lastly, please can I remind members to use their microphones and speak directly into them. Please do not turn away when speaking to enable your comments to be picked up on the recording of the meeting. In the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all the instructions given to you by our team. Turning to the agenda, the first item is apologies for absence. I have apologies for absence from Councillor Kathleen Becker. I don't believe there are any others. Nope.
No, Chair, thank you.
In terms, second item of the agenda is membership of Cabinet committees. We have no changes to make those. The third item of the agenda is disclosure of interests. I have a personal and non-prejudicial interest to declare as a member of the County Council. Councillor Porter.
Mine.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
I have a...
Councillor Thompson. The next item would be public participation, but we don't have any public requests to participate. Item number 6 is minutes of the previous meeting held on the 18th of October 2022. Anybody have comments on those minutes, or are they agreed? Very much. The next item is Leader and Cabinet announcements. I have one brief announcement to make. Yesterday I received a copy of a letter sent by the leaders of Hampshire County Council and Kent County Council to the Prime Minister, Chancellor and Secretary of State about the financial crisis in local government. In their letter, they highlighted the problem facing councils from the lack of the Fair Funding Review, lack of the new 2-year deal for local government, and call for legislative change to revise our statutory obligations, their statutory obligations to match the reduced level of resources that they're receiving. Perhaps most concerningly, given the context that we're in, both Hampshire and Kent have made it clear that without a change to local government funding and a clear plan for long-term financial sustainability, they are likely to be considering Section 114 notices within the next year or so. So clearly, if you look at some of the other items they highlight, even with drastic cuts to services, we do not believe we can close our future budget gaps based on current forecasts, and we'll need to consider entering into formal talks with our auditors, DLUC and Treasury over the coming months. So very concerning news, because obviously if Hampshire were to enter that type of financial situation, it would put pressure on us, although I would stress that we are not in the same financial situation as them, and that part of the purpose of what we will be discussing later today is to ensure that we do not get to the same point of financial crisis that the County Council currently faces. Are there any other announcements? Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Leader. Just a brief announcement. Say that the Cost of Living Summit take place next Tuesday, November the 22nd at 1:30 p.m. Where we will come together with our partners, look at how we coordinate and we maximise our efforts for those who are very badly affected by the cost of living crisis. We've had a very good response so far from partners, but if there are any partners who received an invitation and haven't yet replied, I'd like to urge them to do so. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Earlier, because we had probably problems with traffic, I skipped over the item of request from councillors to speak. I have requests from councillors Godfrey, Horrell and Wallace, and since you're all now in the room, can I just confirm that councillors Godfrey and Wallace wish to speak on item 8, the General Fund budget. Councillors Horrell and Wallace wish to speak on item 9, the HRA. And I wasn't clear whether it was one or both of councillors Godfrey and Horrell who wished to speak on the Rural England Prosperity Fund, or neither. Neither. Go. We will remove 3 minutes from the expected meeting run time then. Thank you very much indeed. That then brings us to the question of the General Fund budget options and medium-term financial strategy. Councillor Power, would you like to introduce the paper?
I'd be delighted. Thank you very much. In common with councils across the country, we are facing inflationary pressures not seen for many years and immensely variable inflationary pressures, which has led to some difficulties in predicting our expenditure. In the absence of clarity as to what, if any, financial support there will be from government on our budget planning for the next year and beyond, this has involved many difficult decisions. The new home bonus is the biggest known unknown, but there are many others. Over the past few months, we've had meetings with heads of service and cabinet members who assist in finding both short-term and long-term savings to address the predicted deficit. They've also contributed to the list of matters to be investigated further to establish what savings can be achieved and actually quantify the impact on services and residents. That work is going to be commissioned under recommendation 9 of the paper before us today. However, we do need to address the short-term deficits to ensure we do not go over budget next year, and the measures before you in the paper will achieve that. I have no hesitation in recommending the entire set of recommendations, and I'd welcome any questions.
Thank you very much indeed. I think now I would like to take the deputations from councillors. If Councillor Godfrey could come forward, please, to make your points.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quite a repeat of the speech I gave last year, but troubles afoot. Governments at all levels is facing a very difficult future, as Councillor Power outlined in your message from the county councils highlighted. With inflation needing to be brought under control, local authority finances have been reliant on additional central government funding to deal with the challenges of a pandemic over the last 2-3 years. Last year, this council accepted the need to use a large chunk of our reserves to balance the books, while officers brought forward strategic proposals, changes to the budget, but the council could live within the means for medium term. This report outlines those same financial challenges we faced last year, plus greater variations on inflation, but with no new government grants and little chance of them coming forward after this Thursday. But the report includes no substantive progress on delivering budget change reforms. Instead, recommendation 9 seeks to fritter away another £450,000 on external resource to generate savings or income, which hasn't been generated over the last 9-12 months. Having already spent £1 million in 12 months to do just this, there's nothing in this report to show any progress. The report does not provide a schedule for achieving the £2 million per annum saving needed in the next 15 months, nor are there any proposals to deliver these additional savings. There seems little control over the continued wasteful expenditure, such as the £800,000 being spent on consultants, or the £650,000 on business rates on empty investment properties. The major projects, which may be a source of, may have been a source of income for the council, are going nowhere. The Station Approach project now pushed back again, the Central Winchester regeneration very unlikely to bring in any income to replace the £700,000 a year of the current rental income from that site. Even the garden waste scheme, with its subscription rates well over target, is still costing more than it brings in. The administration have found many ways to spend money and made many assertions that plans were being developed. But when will tangible progress be made in delivering more income or generating income to fill the £19 million hole in the accounts forecast in this report over the next 5 years? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for your comments. Councillor Wallace.
Yes, it's been announced yesterday. Hampshire County Council wrote to the government warning that they may be forced to declare bankruptcy within the next few months because of the unprecedented financial crisis. Therefore, I'm pleased that Winchester Council has undertaken this analysis and has a plan for continued provision of services with a relatively small impact on residents. I commend the officers as the report appears to be a well thought through analysis. Two areas of concern that I have are one around the baseline assumption on the cost increases, the overall reduction in the risk. On page 33, I was pleased to see that sensitivity analysis has been performed on some of the key assumptions, including inflation, pay inflation, and utility inflation. However, there are questions around whether the baseline that is the most appropriate. In other sections of the report, short-term inflationary impacts of over 20% were noted in some sectors. However, a contractual inflation rate of 7%, 10% for 22, 23, 24 has been applied to the baseline. I understand that there are lots of different contributors to the contract, but I would ask the officers to confirm whether the percentages are correct, are the correct baseline. Similarly, pay inflation is assumed at 5.5% in both the next 2 years. Just last week, servants voted to strike. Now, I'm not sure how that plays out in Winchester. But again, it's just a question of are these assumptions that we've put into the also, there's a third one is really around the utility inflation. It's obviously extremely difficult to forecast rates going forward. So would it make sense to apply a more pessimistic assumptions baseline? The other main concern is about the reduction in reserves from overall reserves from 38 million in 2 to 20. I was reviewing the document too late last night, but it wasn't clear to me why the reserves were reduced so significantly. Why it's gone down to 20. I could see which reserves had reduced, but I couldn't. That was happening. I would appreciate if that could be more. Obviously, it's a substantial reduction, and therefore it's important that the council get on.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Warrison. Thank you for those questions on some items of the paper. Councillor Power, do you have any comments on the points made by Councillors Godfrey and Wallace?
Certainly do. I found them very useful. I think we have to take the sensitivity analysis first. Predicting the future is always difficult, and we are in particularly volatile times. I do trust officers to have taken a view on the market view, and Mr. Botham will clarify the degree of analysis he has undertaken shortly. But these predictions are changing daily, weekly. We can only take a medium view and do our best, and I'm very satisfied that officers have taken that. Regarding pay, during our meetings with the heads of service, we identified at least 2 areas where we need additional staff. Where we are using agency staff, where that may not be the best use of council resources. And we are looking at plans to reduce that usage and bring those posts to the regular staff where future demand justifies. I can't say enough how useful those meetings are. I think every councillor should have the opportunity to go through those services. It was very educational for me, certainly. I'll leave Mr. Botham to handle the reserves because that is his forte. And then to Councillor Godfrey's question. We are making proposals here to address the deficit that is arising over the next 15 years. They are in recommendations 1 to 8. And therefore I'm a little confused that he doesn't think we're doing anything to address the extra costs arising in the next 15 months, but no doubt that will come out in due course. Recommendation 9 authorises further work to really look into where we can save money, various areas of the council's operation, to quantify the cost of improving those and to quantify the impact on residents. None of those are 5-minute jobs, and they do have to be done properly, Leader, if we are not going to risk the family China on destroying services without a clear picture of where we are going to go. And we must do that work, and it has to be done properly. And we need to put the funding in place to ensure it is done properly. We have a transitional reserve for that purpose. We are using less than 1/6 of it. So I'm a little confused about that one. And the other one was on major projects. Now, we live in challenging times, and the proposals that justified the purchase of property some years ago are no longer sound proposals and have to be revisited. To move quickly on major projects in such a lively environment would be wrong when we are looking after other people's money. I hope that satisfies Councillors Wallace and Godfrey, but I'm sure we will talk further. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Power. Colleagues,
We hear from Mr. Botham on
Yes. Mr. Botham.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of comments on some of the assumptions that were included in the report. And I can assure members that a lot of work has gone in on that sensitivity analysis around the different ranges of assumptions that have been included. Some commentary around the allowance for contractor inflation. In 22-23, the 7% is getting close to a known figure now because most of that has already occurred. We have a number of our contracts which are linked directly to consumer price index uplift on an annual basis. We were uplifted earlier in the year when inflation rates were lower, so that was the reason. We are already seeing Bank of England action to address the current levels of inflation. So we have made the assumptions that they will remain in place for some time, but we're not anticipating a significant increase in those CPI inflation in the short term and throughout the course of the next year. We anticipate it will begin to fall during the year, which is very much in line with Bank of England forecast. As the strategy has highlighted, we test the sensitivity of that not happening. With regard to utilities represent a relatively small part of the overall revenue budget, and so quite a significant increase in the utilities doesn't have a major impact on the overall. So that's why we're reasonably comfortable with the assumptions that we've done. With regard to the changes to reserves, a lot of those changes will be changes that have previously been approved. Though investment in major projects that was approved in last year's budgets, we haven't highlighted every single change that's already been approved. The report obviously does include some recommendations to make specific uses of reserves, and they're set out in the recommendation. We can certainly provide more information on that. Be helpful for. With regard, Councillor Godfrey also referred to £1 million spend on the strategic review. We did not set aside £1 million last year for the strategic review. The £1 million was towards regeneration work. So I just wanted to clarify that point. With regard to the progress so far on the strategic review, it was included in last year's strategy as a 2-year process. We're 1 year into that process. The second year will be a very challenging year, as set out in the report. We've got some very specific studies to do, and we are projecting that we need additional support with that because of the limited capacity teams have to complete that work. So that's the reason for the background recommendation for the 450,000.
Thank you very much indeed. Colleagues, do any members of Cabinet have questions to the paper, things they would like to ask further? Well, if nobody else does, I do. We do face a changing situation. So, for example, the timing of the medium-term fiscal plan has been moving around. Originally, it was on October the 31st. Now it's November the 17th, and it never even existed before the ill-named growth plan of September the 23rd. So, you know, we will see evolving pictures on interest rates and inflation. What's the process for managing that from here on in, on top of what we're aiming to agree today?
I think, Leader, you were fortunate enough to attend the Arning Close briefing yesterday. The message that came out from that, very clear. In the face of inflation at 10.1% and building inflation at 40%, if you can invest your reserves in delivering benefits to communities now, that you can be assured will deliver those benefits, that is the good way to do it. You don't want to actually keep too much money in the bank because it is being continually eroded in the face of interest rates of about 4% or less. So we have a Treasury management plan. We have very good support from Arning Close. They do warn us if they think we are going into difficult territory. Now, Mr. Botham, I think you might be able to advise how often they look at our financial plans and actually give us that advice.
We're in regular dialogue with Arlene Close, and they're reviewing on an ongoing basis, so they would notify us of any significant changes as they happen. We will receive commentary regarding any announcements on 17th, and again when there's more detailed announcements later in December. So in the points Councillor Todd saying about the timeline and how things change from here, we are anticipating that we'll find out something from the announcements later this week. Already talk around potential changes to council tax formula. Been sort of tabled in the press today. But I don't anticipate too much detail from that. The detail comes at the end of December, normally very 18th, 19th of December, that sort of time. And the finance team will use that to build the detailed budget that we bring to the February Council. And that will continually be revised in light of any inflation announcements. Sure that it's based on the latest data at that time.
Thank you very much indeed. That's very useful to have that clarity of timing, that we'll be hearing more in December about the assumptions that we need for effectively, presumably a revised medium-term financial strategy in time for the budget in February. Is that correct? And of course, revised budget.
We're not anticipating it to be in sufficient detail to revise the strategy. We think the announcement will be relatively a short-term announcement. If that changes, obviously, that will be reported to members at the time. We are anticipating it to be an announcement specific to next year and next year alone, potentially the year after as well, but not one that will amend the overall strategy.
Thank you very much indeed. Are there any other questions? Councillor Ferguson.
It was mentioned when the paper was introduced that we don't have clarity yet over the new homes bonus. I wondered again, will we be waiting to December for that? And do you have any feel for whether the new homes bonus will be maintained? Whether Councillor Power or Mr. Botham?
That announcement is made with the announcements at the end of December. So that's the earliest we're anticipating any clarity around that. Current indications are that new homes bonus no longer exists and won't be given, but we do know there is still some in the set aside for new homes bonus that may be reallocated in a similar form. So I think there may be something, but it's just, until that announcement in December, we're not going to know. The members will remember, obviously, it's similar to last year. We weren't anticipating anything, but actually the net gain from the announcement was about 1.3 million for the current year. Anything like that would directly address the deficit that's forecast in the appendices.
Thank you very much indeed. Colleagues, any debate on the issue? Councillor Lerney.
Thank you, Chairman. Seems inappropriate to simply put this paper through without discussing some of the very difficult issues which we're facing and some of the choices we've had to make within it. It's been highlighted by all speakers that we are in a time when all councils are having to make difficult decisions. One of those decisions is around increased parking charges in our city centre, and the times charging applies. But I think it's really important to note that alongside that difficult decision, we have also taken the decision to maintain free Sunday and evening parking in park and walk car parks, and have no increase proposed in charges either to edge of town or to park and ride car parks. Those changes put us in line with many other cities with significant visitor numbers. And in addition, the Winchester Movement Strategy, which was supported by Conservative and Lib Dem councillors alike, which does commit the council to using demand management, including parking charges, to reduce city centre traffic. The proposals will increase the differential between edge of city and city centre parking, and the charges accelerate the direction of travel the City Council was already on, rather than being a divergence. As of next year, we will start seeing a reduction in the available number of spaces in the city centre, and we do need to encourage both a change in parking behaviour and also modal shift to public transport and active travel. In connection with that, a significant number of city centre residents have made representations to councillors about on-street parking on Sundays. Charging on Sundays in our car parks has made no apparent impact in the number of visitors to the city or the car park occupancy. But what it has done is it's increased the number of people who have come into the city and are parking in resident parking spaces. And it's really important that we make sure that we aren't encouraging driving in circles around the centre of town, and also that we ensure that residents who have paid for permits are able to park close to their homes. We are making a change to the advertised traffic regulation order programme to look at changes to on-street restrictions in the city centre, prior to that work moving back to the county council. Garden waste has been touched on. As with many issues, this is a balancing act. We want to maximise the garden waste we collect while being fair to residents who don't have a bin, many of whom have no garden or indeed compost all their garden waste at home. The subscription increase for garden waste collection covers contract and bin costs, while the increased discount for those on council tax benefit from £10 to £15 effectively wipes out the difference for those struggling most. While this might not represent full cost recovery, it does represent a saving of over £1 million a year compared to the previous garden waste system. So it certainly is a change that we've already made, which has put the council in a much better financial position. All Hampshire authorities now charge for garden waste collection, and we will remain in the lower price quartile even before other authorities reconsider their charges for next year. Given the increased cost of driving to household waste recycling centres, and that unlike other authorities we do provide a free bin, the charge still represents very good value for money, and we anticipate take up to remain high. So clearly this is a difficult time for councils. I think one of the things that we're doing today is making some of those difficult decisions earlier rather than pushing them off into next year, which would mean that savings and increased income would take even longer to come forward. And I think this is a sensible way for us to be managing the finances of the council as we go through what will be a difficult few years. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Lerney. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Leader. I wasn't actually going to speak in this debate, but I've been, if you like, encouraged to do so following Councillor Godfrey's comments. I would really like to remind everybody that in May 2019, over control of this, previous Conservative administration left a £19 million hole in our budget. We've absolutely closed that. We have made significant inroads into that. In spite of having the pandemic, the government at that time saying spend what you like and everything will be, you cover all your costs, which has been a promise that not kept. And later on in this meeting, I will be talking about and presenting a paper which again presents a lot of uncertainty. And I think over the years, over the last few years, we've been promised year after year, local government will receive a 2 to 3 year settlement. That has not happened. And I think the uncertainty that on local authorities, absolutely, and they themselves agreed that during the pandemic, we were the ones who were able to keep our residents safe. We kept our communities going. We helped, delivered on all the actions that the government. I really do think that all those issues, helping our residents, very difficult, and we will be expected and will be at the forefront of our residents, our response to residents during this cost of living crisis. And it is going to be a heavy burden, and we'll have to pay a price for that. But I think it's incumbent on government to actually treat us fairly and actually come out with a fair settlement. So I'm very happy to support, and I think it's a sensible, sets out difficult decisions that we're going to tackle sooner rather than later. That makes sense.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Leader. I would also like to support the paper for many of the reasons that have already been set out. But I also wanted to congratulate Councillor Power and officers for the sensitivity, the way that they've gone about creating the paper today, and the work that has been done in detail, both with Cabinet members and officers, to look at the challenge ahead and to look at how we move forward through this together. There was the foresightness, both of the administration with officers, to create not only a transitional reserve, but then later a inflation reserve, recognising some of the dangers and volatilities that we would see within our finances. The items under 18.3 that have been identified as opportunities for transformation are exactly that. We aren't simply looking to impose drastic cuts where others are having to do just that. We are looking at ways of transforming our service so we maintain those important services for our residents. I'm delighted, and Councillor Looney has already pointed out, that everything that we've looked at, even where there have been price increases, we have considered to think about our most vulnerable residents. And so that increase in the discount for garden waste, for those who are on the lowest income, is really welcome to me. So I do support this paper. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much indeed. Are there any other comments? Yeah, Councillor Gordon-Smith.
Yes, I know at the moment, every time you listen to the news, there's the most appalling doom and gloom. But this crisis started off very rapidly, partly from the invasion of Ukraine. And having worked in the construction industry for 50 years, I've seen regular crashes, slowdowns, coming off the rails, you know, going back to 1972 and the oil crisis, 2008. And one does come out the other side. And I'm quite concerned too, obviously, with the major projects. But with all these big projects that run on for 10, 15 years, you're going to go through an economic cycle one way or another. So I think we just have to persevere. And I think this is a very well thought out paper, going to maintain our services. And we've been looking into ways of the transition, using the transition reserve to come up with much more efficient ways of working, including, for example, working on upgrading the IT systems and trying to encourage people to report online and so on, rather than using costly manpower. I think there's some, you know, increased efficiency and savings to boot. So I recommend this. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Porter.
Yes, I think the cuts that we've made, or changes that we've made, include some vacancies. But we are absolutely determined to change the quality of service for our residents. Personally, I ring up as a member of the public every week, phone lines. If the person is not able to use the actually access the town. I think that's really important. Everybody should feel they have a service from their local. Personal but very positive service from to suggest and including the staff are really considerate of that they're actually serving.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Porter. And I think you make a good point that at the heart of this needs to be the people of the district of Winchester. You know, we are in very unprecedented times. Inflation is at a level that many of us don't remember for quite a few decades. Bank of England is talking about the longest recession since records began. We've seen the extra pressure put on the economy by the ill-thought-out budget in September, which has had, as we learned yesterday from our external financial advisors, a permanent impact on our borrowing costs and the level of intervention that the bank has had to make, the Bank of England has had to make. And coming back to the people of Winchester, there will be people in the district who are choosing between heating and eating as a result of costs soaring. There are people who are facing challenges because of rising interest rates. So although we talk about the fact that it's a difficult time for councils, we mustn't forget, and this plan doesn't forget, that it is a difficult time for many residents and businesses in the district as well. And that is why we've been very careful with the set of proposals that we've put forward to ensure that people aren't seeing an increase in park and walk and park and ride pricing. If they're on receipt of council tax benefit, they're not seeing an increase in garden waste charges. It is a difficult time for people. It's also a difficult time for councils. There will be people who are relying on care and other services who, unless the government take the action that the leaders of Hampshire and Kent have asked for, and which I have written back to the leader of Hampshire to support what he has written in his letter, there will be people who see very real consequences of that, and there will be amongst the most vulnerable people in our community. It is also a challenging time for us. There is no such thing as an easy, hard choice, or an easy, there's no such thing as an easy, hard choice. We are in a stronger financial position than Hampshire. We're not facing the same challenges. We have a budget that is sustainable into the future if we deliver the plan that's laid out in this paper. It will force changes. There was discussion of major projects. Construction costs are going through the roof. Interest rates are going through the roof. That requires, that, as Councillor Gordon-Smith has said, that doesn't mean we stop, but it does mean that it will be harder and it may take more time to find ways through that. I'm very pleased that we protected the cost of living support plan, that we're keeping costs down for the most vulnerable residents. So we're making hard choices. This is not an easy thing, and we shouldn't pretend that we're happy to be in this situation. But given the challenges we face, I think this is a very well thought through and well put together paper, and I'm very grateful to Councillor Power and particularly to the officers for the large amount of work they put into this. So I think we now need to move to a vote on the recommendations. I will take these in sections. Councillor Thompson, you pointed out an interest in the Hampshire Cultural Trust, so I'd ask that you do not vote on item 11 when we come to that in the agenda. running through the recommendations. I will take recommendations, I think, 1 to 10 as a group. So that covers noting the projections in Appendix A, making the decision that if we get additional grant awards such as New Homes Bonus, we use it to fund the forecast deficit before we use reserves. And I think that touches on the point that I discussed with Mr. Botham earlier about what happens if circumstances change. That we approve the medium-term financial strategy as set out in sections 22 to 28. That we approve an increase in garden waste subscriptions with effect from November to achieve cost recovery, and the increased discount for residents in receipt of a council tax reduction. We approve that following consultation that we increase the parking charges in Zone 1, although freeze the parking charges for park and walk and park and ride charging. That we add a project to look at Sunday on-street parking restrictions in the inner area permit parking zone. So that's broadly the area inside the or inside or near the one-way system and near our car parks, central car parks. Approve a small increase in charges in the market towns for parking. Approve an inflation-linked inflation or cost or market-based increase in fees and charges, or delegation of those decisions to the Section 151 officer in consultation with the Cabinet Member for Finance and Value and the Cabinet Member responsible for the service. Approve the use of 450,000 of the existing transitional reserve to support the council-wide Transformation Challenge programme. And approve that 900,000 of the existing business rates retention reserve be reallocated to the exception inflation reserve. So, Cabinet, are you agreed with recommendations 1 to 10?
Agreed.
In terms of the item that asks for an approved detailed budget to be prepared in February 2023 based on the attached assumptions, the above assumptions, the final spending review announcements, and including the list of options listed, are all of you, apart from Councillor Thompson, agreed with those recommendations?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. So, colleagues, the paper in its current form. Agreed. We'll now move on to look at the housing revenue account. Pleased to see David here from TACT. Ian, sorry, I didn't see your name written down here. Thank you for coming along. But I understand you don't want to make a statement at this time, but if there are questions that come up, well, would you like to make a comment later in the, or are you happy just to listen in? Okay, well, if you do want to say anything, then please do let us know. In terms of so the next item is the housing revenue account. Councillor Ferguson, would you like to introduce the paper?
Thank you, Leader. I'm pleased to be able to introduce the HRA business planning and budget options paper today, but I wanted to highlight at the outset that unlike in previous years, Cabinet are only being asked to note the draft 30-year business plan and the potential increase in the borrowing requirement to fund the New Homes programme, while we await the government decision regarding the rent increase ceiling that they're likely to impose for the next financial year. They're moving away from the current formula that rent would increase by up to CPI plus 1%. The paper highlights the impact that the expected government's rent increase ceiling of what the market believes will be 5% on the 30-year plan, although the actual ceiling could be higher or lower than that. It also highlights two other significant factors which we've already heard about when we were looking at the medium-term financial plan. The unprecedented inflationary pressures that have affected the ongoing costs within the HRA, for example, maintenance, repair and staff costs and new build costs. The volatility and upward trend in public works loan interest rates. There are three particular things worth noting. While the social housing sector generally expects the government to propose a 5% rent rise ceiling for 23-24 and to carry that through to 24-25, so that if I haven't already said it, it consulted on potential ceilings of 3%, 5% and 7%. If it does impose that 5% ceiling, the paper shows that the HRA business plan would remain sustainable and viable and allow us to continue to fill our commitment to build 1,000 new affordable homes over the next 10 years, notwithstanding the fact that it would not allow the council to cover the inflationary rising costs in the HRA. However, if the government did impose a rent increase ceiling below 5%, for example at 3%, which they have consulted on, then this would potentially make the HRA draft business plan unsustainable, and very hard choices would have to be made in consultation with TACT and our tenants as to what that would mean in terms of both the new build programme and the way in which we schedule and manage repairs, servicing upgrades, and the services our tenants expect. The inflationary pressures and particularly cost increases have substantially increased the cost of building new homes, which are up 42% since last year. This is substantial, and the impact we've already seen in a number of different new schemes. This will have a significant rise in the HRA borrowing requirement over the 30-year term. And if we are going to continue to invest in building the significant number of high quality, low carbon homes we want to, then the report highlights that this could lead to an increased borrowing requirement over last year's plan of 112 million. We know our tenants are very anxious about the likely rent increases, particularly when the significant cost of living rises they've already seen, and we've highlighted, the leader spoke earlier about rises in heating, in being able to cook, in fuel, in energy, in food. And we know that these are having a disproportionate effect on those on low incomes. And while we have already consulted with them about the government's plans to set a ceiling, and we will continue to work with them very closely as we move forward once we get that decision. And the one more thing I wanted to add is, while any increases in rents that's not in line with inflation will have a longer term detrimental effect on the HRA in terms of lost income and what that means in terms of that new build programme. If the CPI formula plus 1% had been imposed, that could have meant rent increases of 11.1%. And notwithstanding the government consulting on potential rent ceilings, we were already looking very closely at what that rent increase might have been as an administration and talking to TACT about that. We're promised a government decision soon. We are waiting. That's why at the moment it's only a paper that we can note, but we hope it gives you a flavour of what the impact of those ceilings might be. I'm happy to also answer questions along with officers, and I'm glad to see that Dick Johnson has joined us, as he knows these numbers inside out. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I have two councillor deputations. Councillor Horrell, would you like to make some comments or make your deputation?
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to address Cabinet today, and thank you to officers for a very helpful paper. I agree setting an HRA plan at this time, prior to the decisions re-rent setting, would be difficult, but you have helpfully prepared a draft. What I do not understand is why you are marking your own homework and why this paper has not been discussed with councillors in other committees. It is unlikely you would take on board the many useful contributions that could be made today in Cabinet. Indeed, the planned discussion at the recent Cabinet Housing Committee failed to take place, where you had representation across all parties, which is the way we normally work on housing. You yourselves raised many questions in the paper that have been fundamental to the housing strategy for many years, but you haven't given us an opportunity to discuss these or to offer options. Some questions are, should we slow the new build programme to take account of the increased costs in the short term? Are we prepared to continue to build new homes at a cost exceeding their current market value? When did we actually commit as a council building all new homes to passive plus standards as detailed in section 7.1? Why are we funding an ecologist in planning at this time? Why are we forecasting inflation to be at 2% by 27-28 when the Bank of England forecasts 25-20? Why would we propose to increase shared ownership rents by 12.8% in 23-24 given the cost of living pressures? Why is this a time to realign fees which are out of kilter, such as sewerage? We are fortunate we have reserves of over 53 million in the HRA, as detailed in section 14.6. How should we use these to best effect for the HRA in the short term? And why are we raising the issue of our housing IT system, section 17? The provision of our council homes and communities is absolutely fundamental to all we do as a council, especially in the light of the current economic situation. They are needed more than ever. I personally would welcome the opportunity for all councillors to be involved in a full discussion of these various questions and options, and for us to be involved in such a significant part of the council's work, and would welcome a recommendation in CAB 3365 to that effect. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Horrell. Councillor Wallace.
Thank you. Thanks to the officers for putting together this report. Planning is the report essentially advisory at this point. However, there are three areas where clarification. Firstly, assumptions appear to be different between the general fund and the housing budget. Inflation is assumed to return to 2% by 2026 in the general fund forecast compared to the budget. So there's various other energy price. It would be useful if both funds use the same baseline as if standing. Secondly, it would be helpful to see a chart of the housing asset value alongside the chart of borrowing. Of building houses increase general value or price of those houses. Well, the charts appear to show one side of the equation, the increased housing survey of the properties is included, this would give us a better understanding of council being asked. Thirdly, there was a comment made in section 13.8 about the trade-off between delivering developments and rent levels. Would it be possible to schedule a follow-up meeting to detail the business case for house? You know, typical initial build costs for passive house developments are 10 to 15% higher than for additional property. Funding is required. Lower heating costs, value. Need to look for opportunities to keep benefits in the business model.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Ferguson, some interesting and useful points made there. Would you care to respond?
Thank you, Leader. There are quite a few, so I will try to make sure I don't miss any. This paper was originally scheduled to go to Cabinet Housing, but it was felt the significance of the impact of the likely rent increase, both or rent increase ceiling on the HRA, and the fact that the different cost and inflationary pressures were going to have such a significant impact on potential borrowing for the new programme. It should be considered by a full council. However, the intention is that the final paper, when we have clarity, that paper will go back to Cabinet Housing. I understand, although the Chief Executive just gave me a meaningful look.
Can I assist, Deputy Leader? Of course. Most importantly, both of these financial papers today are being received by the Scrutiny Committee in the next 10 days. So there is opportunity for members to give a view at that time before final construction of either budget. So I'm confident there is member opportunity. There is a request for a member briefing. I'm sure the office will accommodate that before. And yes, indeed, Deputy Leader, you are completely correct. This paper was scheduled for the Cabinet Committee for Housing, but due to its significance, it has been taken here because, as you have said, a decision of such magnitude should be made by full Cabinet. We are yet to determine the place where the business case comes, be that Cabinet Committee or Cabinet. However, both of those decision-making bodies have the same authority and are able to forward to councillors' requests. So we'll come back on that one.
Thank you, Leader. Sorry, not Leader. Sorry. Thank you for that clarification. But I do take the point, Councillor Horrell, that it would seem appropriate to, if we can, bring it to Cabinet Housing, having brought it to Cabinet at this time. The question of the debate around, passive homes, both yourself and Councillor, building to passive home standards, both yourself and Councillor Wallace raised that point. I think that would be an appropriate topic for Cabinet Housing to discuss with members, because it is such a significant area, and for voices on both sides to be heard, as well as, of course, our representatives from TACT who sit as permanent members of that committee. We did highlight that issue when we were looking at the Southbrook cottages and business case only in our Cabinet Housing meeting a couple of weeks ago. We had to weigh up the challenge of building to the very highest standards for the future, and that need to address the climate emergency against the costs. But I do think that would be a topic worthy that committee looking into. We can certainly, perhaps, we will talk to officers about how we bring it. You asked about the inflation figures, as the council was, but I'll ask Mr. Johnson to respond to that. In response to the question about are we really considering increasing shared ownership rents on that proportion of the equity that's outstanding by 12 or 13%. The paper actually highlights that this is a decision to be made. It doesn't say that we determined to make it something that we need to look at. And indeed, we don't yet know whether the government may impose a cap on those rents, the rent rise ceiling on those as well. With regards to that cost alignment, you picked out sewage. Again, the paper actually says that this is something we need to look at. We do have a significant, at the moment, sorry, I'll put it a different way. At the moment, the HRA are actually subsidising private owners who are doing those HRA sewage works. That is inequitable. Therefore, we do need to look at that. But the paper says this is something we have to address, but rightly points out the difference in what people are paying and the difference in the cost. You talked about the reserves and how we best use those reserves. And again, the paper does point to, and again, Mr. Johnson might want to talk about this, because we have significant reserves, that in effect allows us to smooth out the volatility in the likely public works loan board interest rates that we're currently seeing. Those have increased substantially in recent weeks, particularly since the fiscal event that became an unevent. And they have gone up, they have fallen back, but they are nowhere at the levels that they were. But the reserves do give us the opportunity to keep moving forward with our need to build high quality, low carbon homes, which are much needed. I'll ask Mr. Johnson to tackle the need for the IT system to be brought into this at this time. There is a need to upgrade that system. Officers have made that very clear, but he can explain why it needs to sit here. We've already talked about that. Councillor Wallace, I'll ask again Mr. Johnson, perhaps Mr. Botham, to talk about why the assumptions, particularly around inflationary, when inflation will fall back, why they're different in the general fund and the HRA. Energy prices, again, I know that's slightly a different calculation for the HRA, but Mr. Johnson can cover that. And then the idea of the table showing housing asset value and borrowing. I believe, Mr. Johnson, there is a table that attempts to show that, but maybe. Have I missed anything, Councillor Horrell or Councillor? I think that is something that I'd like us to look at Cabinet Housing. I feel that's something we should take.
Thanks for highlighting that. I'm sure back to that at the end of the meeting if there's or the end of the paper if there's anything to add. Colleagues, do you have any questions?
Sorry. Mr. Johnson, could you cover those other questions, please?
In terms of the two papers, the general fund attempted to align inflation in two. So if they are different, go back and in terms of the cash-backed reserves, the business plan is a 30-year business. Assuming that essentially that cash-back reserves, which are there at the moment, are needed for the first 5 years, essentially. Borrowing that we may need to make, we can go external because thereafter they are applied to the business plan. I'll run back. So we minimum general reserves over that period in line with 5% of our operating expenditure and owns built expenditure. That's the base plan is actually. Reason that we've got mentioned in paragraph 15, the of the required procurement process for the orchard system is just to highlight the fact that we are looking at that onto a sound basis. 1 year rolling contract with a term contract.
Thank you very much indeed. Any other questions? Councillor Lerney.
Thank you. Most of Cabinet yesterday attended a briefing from Arlene Close, our Treasury advisors, where the latest inflation projections were that inflation was going to peak at a lower level but carry on for much longer. Is it not the case that any of these at the moment are a snapshot in time and that we need to constantly evolve them before we make final budget decisions in February?
Councillor Power.
Thank you, Leader. Could I ask officers about principles? I think we must be seen to be using the same principles across all the services Council provides, and I think it would make it easier for officers as well if we could be reassured on that point that there is a process in it with the town forum. There is a principle that we need to adopt across the council. Reassurance that
Yeah, I would support that. I mean, it does differ from service to service. So some services have very specific requirements, constitutes full cost recovery. So some things you can include, some things you can't. With regard to the housing revenue account, it's relatively specific. The issues around shouldn't be asked to be paid. Where we have other users of that service, those other users, the full cost, the tenants aren't subsidised. That works both ways. There are general fund services shouldn't. But the principle of full cost recovery, yes, it's right. But where it gets and get complicated is where costs vary very significantly from when you're keeping track of those costs. Can be more complex in some areas than that. That's really where what we're faced with charges.
Any other questions? Debate. Councillor Porter.
I'm really disappointed in the thought we wouldn't build houses. Making a very and I'd be very happy to come. One thing we are certain, although the house energy is the way we can ensure that resident least build energy. So it's arguing most strongly that I do appreciate that will cost more. Show a 42% rise. Made an announcement that tomato ketchup's gone up 53%. So you know, there are things that we all have to spend our money on, and if you've got a 5-year-old, you definitely spend your money on tomato ketchup. Actually, you don't want to spend
you had support or anything else want to make?
Yes, the issue about Passive House Plus was discussed at great considerable length in discussion cabinet meeting about Southbrook cottages, and for me it's completely bonkers not to do it to the very highest standard. It wouldn't be in the present situation happening years ago. Take that and balance it against the cost of retrofitting. You mentioned the inconvenience of having to move tenants out. I fail to see why it's even being discussed. At one point, they talked about the market value of the houses done to the house standard, Passive House Plus, and it's very difficult to judge it because data doesn't exist at the moment. I think you can extrapolate houses with high energy efficiency, value of those houses.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Loney.
Thank you. I think it's often a mistake for us to actually look at market prices in locations, because the market price for a house which you rent is out. And a lot of these things actually are reflected not necessarily in the value of the house, but how quickly somebody will buy it and move. And I think what we should be building houses cheap to run, healthy and comfortable. Advantages of passive houses. Not only are they cheap to run, but they're also well ventilated, which we know is an issue in a lot of houses. Even very new houses are seeing real problems with a lack of ventilation. And passive houses have been developed over 30 years to deal with all of the rise with ventilated homes. Certainly I lived in a house in Sweden in the 70s with underfloor, which was fabulously cheap to heat despite having temperatures of -20 outside. You were all house. So we're actually, passive houses just built experience of the past. I really don't think we should be private practice and just worrying about trying to achieve our profit within a market envelope. This is about providing the best possible can. The cost of living crisis has highlighted housing. Private rents are rising even faster than inflation, struggling to find housing. We're also seeing a situation where older people are really struggling and are starting to become a real on the welfare state, simply because they can't really afford homes in a private situation. We are long-term landlords, things in the long term. I think we will find in the long term passive houses are actually compared to our existing homes. There's certainly a lot of benefits about taking out standard radiators, sense of pipes carrying water. I think this is going in the right direction. Clearly there are tweaks that will need to be made as we go forward, and obviously the financial situation is constantly changing. But I do think that we do deserve it to our tenants, both current and future, to building them the best homes we possibly can.
Thank you, Councillor Loney. Councillor Ferguson, do you have any?
Just really to thank colleagues for their comments, and to replace something that we spoke about at Cabinet Housing with regard to the passive house scheme and making that choice to build the best possible energy efficient homes that we can that will also go with carbon. A tenant had said to me for the question of should we be doing this, and the response was we simply cannot. So the view from the tenants is that we must be building homes to the highest sustainable and energy efficiency that we can. my only last comment would really be that it is a bit of a tightroad at the moment, because while we, of course, with this uncertainty about that rent rise ceiling, we want to support our tenants through the cost of living crisis. We still have to eventually come up with an HRA budget 30-year plan which is viable. And there is that real need to continue to invest in building high quality, sustainable, affordable homes that we know residents not only need, but they're telling us they want. It is interesting, we recently launched our Retrofit Ready programme for our own council tenants. And of the 1,600 people who received a letter telling them they could opt in to be part of that programme, as of yesterday, we'd had almost 200 residents back saying, I would like a more sustainable, a more heat efficient home. So it shows us it's not just that we should be building them, it's also increasingly what our tenants would like to see. And the other thing to say as well is that our tenants really value the quality of our existing homes, the work we're doing to those, but also the quality of the services that we offer. And so there is, as I said, that balancing act, and that's why this paper we brought forward shows that if the cap is 5%, the current HRA would be viable and sustainable. There would be additional borrowing costs for the new builds programme. But we want to make sure that we don't not only build the homes we need and that we want to build, but also that the tenants get the services that they rightly deserve to live in good, decent, sustainable, warm homes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. and thank you to you and to the officers for all your hard work in putting together such a well thought through, considered plan at a time of great uncertainty. We have 4 recommendations in front of us because of the certain financial situation and the absence of government confirmation in terms of rent setting ceilings. There are 4 requests to note the situation we're in. The first is just confirmation that we're noting that it is not possible to approve a 30-year HRA business plan at this time. The second is to show an outline, to note an outline of what that plan would look like if there is a 5% rent increase cap in 23-24. To note the 30-year HRA capital investment programme of £1.1 billion, an increase of 212 million on the present plan. Obviously, this will be subject to the approval of individual schemes and subject to the final detailed HRA budget and 10-year capital investment strategy being approved in February 2022. And then also note the impact of different rent assumptions on the viability of the business plan as set out in section 16, and that the final rent decision will be subject to, although not necessarily defined by, the results of the government consultation on rent ceilings for 23-24. Colleagues, do you agree with those recommendations?
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. That paper's agreed. Before I move to the next paper, I would like to which is, after 35 years, this is Richard Botham's last cabinet meeting as an officer. And I think the fact that we are in a position to look at a plan for the medium-term financial strategy and a plan for the HRA with confidence, despite such challenging times, is a tribute to Richard and the journey he has been on and that he has taken the council on in the last 35 years. And it was absolutely right as well for Councillor Ferguson to talk about the quality of services and the quality of the operation of the HRA. Now, of course, this is not to belittle the contribution made by the people who work for Richard in terms of preparing all the work that's been done for us today. But I think even the quality of that work, and I'm sure Ms. Keyes and Mr. Johnson, if he was here, would agree with me, is influenced by the person that Richard is. He is somebody who, aside from his immensely reassuring technical knowledge and expertise, his ability in difficult times to lower your blood pressure and make you feel that there is a grip, that everything is under control, his kind and respectful way that he deals with the public, with officers, his colleagues, and with councillors, has been an enormous contribution to this council in all the different roles that he's had over that time. So he gives us confidence. He shows astonishing dedication. You would not know that he is, in terms of how hard he keeps working and his commitment, that he is but days away from retirement. And it's all based around, I would say, a deep moral core. You know when you deal with Richard that his start point is deep concern for the residents of the district, particularly the most vulnerable residents, particularly the people who he has dealt with for so many years through our council housing. And while, of course, he is always completely professional and takes direction from officers, from councillors in terms of what should be done, we know when we deal with him that aside from his professionalism, we are dealing with somebody whose start point is deep concern for people in the district, particularly the most vulnerable, and that he will kindly and gently make sure that we are aware of their needs and what needs to be done to do the best that we can for those people. So on behalf, I know, of everybody at the council, unfortunately we don't have another council meeting before you go, I would like to thank you very much indeed. And as a small formal record, perhaps Councillor Horrell, Councillor Wallace would like to come to the table for this. I would like to propose a formal vote of thanks to Richard for his outstanding record of service to the council in the last 35 years, and to wish him all the very best for the future. And if all councillors present could join with me in voting on that resolution, we will then move on to the next item of business. All those in favour?
Agreed.
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 Say very quickly that I thought I wasn't going to get the council crap after then the council was cancelled. So thank you very much. Thank you.
It's a pleasure and very well deserved. On to the next item of business. And thank you again. Councillor Thompson, could you please introduce the Rural England Prosperity Fund Investment Plan proposal?
Thank you very much. Colleagues, you will remember that back in July I brought a paper to the Cabinet setting out how the Council proposes to spend the one government allocated prosperity fund. In September this year, government announced an additional further allocation £705,000 to be spent on rural business and rural. Similar to our application for the UK Prosperity Fund, government has asked us to submit an investment setting out how we might spend the money allocated to us by the end of this month. The ideas submitted The Rural Fund is a 2-year programme which will begin in April 2023 and runs until 2025. And the report before you sets out some indicative proposals how we might use this money. And it comes to Cabinet because of the size of the allocation. In line with government requirements, we've already set up a UK Shared Prosperity Partnership Board to receive and consider bids for funds. And this additional allocation of the Rural Fund will be dealt in. Previously, we have consulted widely on the Shared Prosperity Fund, but nevertheless, we thought it was necessary on the Rural Fund. An item went out in the DSU on the 14th of October, which members will have seen. Parish councils were by the October edition of the recent parish liaison board. Emails were sent to our partners and stakeholders, and it was discussed at the first meeting of our UK Shared Prosperity Fund Partnership, which met on the 2nd of November. In addition, I have been meeting with our market towns, including Whiteley and larger settlements, to seek their views. How both. I have to say that all the market towns I've spoken to, they've been excited that there is so putting all this together has been quite a task, and it's been in a relatively short time frame. And whilst the financial allocations are extremely welcome, very frustrating, even though our initial proposals aim shared prosperity, no money is. Time is running away from us. Our understanding is that our allocation cannot be carried over. So it's really important that government doesn't renege on its many months ago now. They do. They'll be letting down our communities and across. Have welcomed this and are actually really quite excited that the money can be spent on. We certainly need clarity. So in closing, I welcome this paper. I'd like to thank all the time and particularly in carrying out engagement, which has been very. I hope members of.
Thank you very much indeed. I don't think we have any council deputations on this paper. Cabinet, do you have any questions? Councillor Porter.
This question really is, what does it in order to get the money to
Well, in the main prosperity fund, there is an allocation. But you're absolutely right. So, which is why to the set up.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. I just wondered whether you could explain to me a little bit more. Newton, the table 1115, talk about indicative allocations. Could you explain to me a bit more what we mean by indicative allocations? The numbers are very specific to the pound, but then we say indicative.
Robbins, would you like to say this?
Yes, certainly, thank you. It's indicative because we are able to move the monies between those proposed funds The reason it goes to the pounds is just balances, and we can actually fully allocate the funds. But the year allocations can't. Between those themes, we are at liberty to move the amounts, and that's why flexibility.
Any other questions? I've got a question. Can we use the money to invest in rural public toilets and also to support the rural local cycling walking infrastructure plan if that's not like elements that aren't funded?
Thank you. The aim of the fund is to add value and to have additional community infrastructure. So it's not to displace funding that might. So if, for example, the scheme might have or some of those elements that would be eligible. Walking and cycling is definitely within the areas of travel and those types of activities.
Thank you very much indeed. Any other questions? The debate. Councillor Gordon-Smith.
As a member, councillor for a market town, I very much welcome this. And I know they've got schemes in New Alresford, which they would love to go ahead with. I think oven ready is the expression. And I think it's a great opportunity. Forward to it.
Thank you. Councillor Lermy.
Thank you. Just very briefly, that I really welcome the focus of this fund. I think the problem we're all living with is that uncertainty. For example, mini holiday is all up in the air until. So, very much welcome the direct travel on this, but I'm not holding my breath in terms of actually receiving.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
I was delighted to see this paper. The Shared Prosperity Fund was good news. Hoping that the money does actually arrive in our coffers, particularly for this year, so we can spend it on time. But also, I know when the LEADER funding was removed, that certainly left a hole for those rural communities. So it is good to see this new scheme being introduced. It's good to see that we're ahead of the game in terms of having the board set up and the work that we've done for the Shared Prosperity Fund very neatly into this. Like Councillor Lerny, I don't hold my breath. The mood music that we've seen in the press over recent days suggests that everything up in the air. Certainly hope that given the work that's gone in, this won't go the way of the Bus Back Better money, when a considerable amount of time and effort was put in to put forward a bid. No money at all was forthcoming. And for the Shared Prosperity Fund, it must be very annoying for officers, having done the work, having been allocated the funds, having been told that they must spend the funds within a certain time frame, and then be told if they don't spend the funds, they can't carry them forward, but there are no funds forthcoming. So I welcome the paper, I welcome the fund, and I will keep my fingers crossed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. And I think we will all keep our fingers crossed. Mr. Thompson, any last words?
No, just to say thank you very much for all your, and yes, we will.
So, colleagues, the recommendations in front of us are to note the proposed investment interventions and ranking, the list of interventions and indicative rural fund allocation is in table 4, delegate authority to the Corporate Head of Service for Economy and Communities in consultation with the Cabinet Member for Business and Culture to take the necessary decisions and actions required to submit an investment plan and accept the allocation of funds. And this needs to be done by the end of the month. And then eventually delegate authority to the Corporate Head of Service to administer the fund, get it, approve the capital budget that's outlined, because this is extra capital spending, and then delegate authority for spending once the agreed, with all our fingers crossed. Probably not part of a formal recommendation. So, Cabinet, are you agreed with the recommendations in front of us?
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. We now move to the last item on the agenda, which is to note future items for consideration, as shown by the December 20 plan. You'll note that there is an addition, which has original paper, which is the extension of the insurance contract. Cabinet, are you happy to, nobody has any comment? Good. Are you happy to note the forward plan?
Noted.
Thank you very much indeed. Since we've now concluded all the business, I therefore declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you everybody for, to officers for all your work, and to colleagues, Cabinet, outside Cabinet, for the discussion that we've had today.